I'm really delighted to open this first panel of the conference, which brings us some outstanding empirical examples of indicator-based policy making. I think that all papers are related in one way or the other to current policy challenges that the EU faces in the wake of the various crises that have sprung up since 2008. We will hear, for instance, about professional dissemination of statistical and other quantitative information. We will hear about factual evidence necessary for guiding and improving financial regulation. We will hear about sustainable governance in the social and economic field. And last but not least, we will hear about the importance of empirical indicators for global governance and the EU's role in global governance. As you have already seen in the program, we have a really great group of speakers at the first panel, from the European Commission, from Eurostat, from a major private think tank, the Bertelsmann Foundation, and of course from the Robert Schuman Center here. I will introduce each speaker very briefly in turn before they present their papers, and we have fixed ourselves a limit of more or less 20 minutes per presentation. If speakers agree, I would propose to collect questions or comments until after all speakers have presented their papers, but if there are urgent comments to make or urgent questions, of course we can also take them in turn. I start with Katia Berti, who will speak on the Commission's fiscal sustainability framework. Yes? Would you like to? No, just a second. Katia is head of sector at the European Commission in DG Economic and Financial Affairs. Her core subjects are the deepening of economic and monetary union and of the macroeconomy of the euro area. Before that, she worked on fiscal policy for 6 years, coordinating the work on fiscal sustainability indicators and public debt projections over the last 2.5 years, also at the European Commission. Her first post at the European Commission was as an economist in DG Employment and Social Affairs. Katia holds a PhD in economics from the University of Nottingham, and her publications have dealt with fiscal reaction functions, banking stress scenarios, and public debt sustainability. Katia, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Wilhelm, and thank you very much to all of you for inviting me to this very interesting event. I'm always very happy to come back to the European Institute, by the way, which I find always a very intellectually stimulating environment. Okay, so as Wilhelm has already anticipated, my presentation will deal with the fiscal sustainability analysis framework. As you might see, at the moment I'm a head of sector for the sector macroeconomy of the euro area. But this presentation, as you will realize, deals more with my previous assignment in fiscal policy directorate. So it's all about debt sustainability and fiscal sustainability indicators. Okay, so first of all, I think it's important to clarify exactly what we want to measure before starting talking about measures, because as you know, fiscal sustainability, if you are familiar, with the domain of fiscal analysis, you know that fiscal sustainability is a bit of a concept that is sometimes borderline also in the relevant literature, in the sense that there are different ways of defining it. So, there is no clear, unique definition of what is meant by fiscal sustainability, not even on the side of the economists. And this becomes particularly relevant, of course, when you aim at identifying appropriate measures to deal with these issues. So, first of all, what we mean with fiscal sustainability in the Commission Services Directorate-General for Economic and Financial Affairs is the solvency of the public sector. So, and by solvency of the public sector, as you can see there, we mean the capability of the government to honor current and future financial obligations, including the commitment to continue providing public goods, services, and transfers. So this kind of definition can be formalized in a way that allows you to transform these into a kind of mathematical formulation from which you can derive some indicators. That is what you see just below the qualitative definition. I mean, we economists like talking about these as the government intertemporal budget constraint, which means if you want to transform this concept of solvency into a mathematical formulation, you simply require an equalization between the flow of government disbursements, including the interest that you pay on your public debt, and the flow of government revenues, everything discounted to the current moment. So these can give rise, as I said, to a mathematical condition that you can solve. If you are interested in these kind of small details, you can go to our fiscal sustainability report, the last issue in 2015, and you have all the derivations that allow you to get to the fiscal sustainability indicators starting from these. What is important to keep in mind is the fact that in this kind of mathematical condition, we also consider the liabilities related to population aging. So in terms of the flow of government expenditure and the government revenues that to discount to the present, the implicit liabilities that are related to population aging, so I'm talking about expenditures on pensions, healthcare, long-term care, are considered. So it's not just explicit liabilities for the government, but it's also these implicit liabilities that are related to population aging. And this, of course, requires the Commission services to run some projections, to know where these kind of outlays and revenues that are also involved into these kind of projections go into the future. So based on a whole set of assumptions, we run projections on aging-related expenditure, public expenditure, and these are always published every 3 years in this kind of flagship publication that is called the Aging Report. The last one is also in 2015. And I want to stress this also because this is the part that is going to be interesting for us once we get to the way these indicators are used in providing policy advice in the context of the European semester. Okay. So always talking about the definition of fiscal sustainability, it's important to bear in mind that the definition that the Commission services are using at this current moment is a much wider one with respect to the one that we had before the crisis. Well, of course, the crisis taught us a number of lessons. One of these is clearly the fact that macro financial developments are extremely important also for fiscal surveillance. I mean, as you, I suppose, all know, the governance framework in the EU has also been reinforced significantly in the context of the crisis with the macro. For instance, one of the new policy tools is the macroeconomic imbalances procedure that goes exactly into this direction of recognizing the importance of macro financial developments for the sustainability of the whole structure. What we did, I mean, starting with the Fiscal Sustainability Report 2012, was to enlarge also the number of items and the number of considerations that we make to be able to assess specifically fiscal sustainability, not looking only at fiscal variables anymore, but looking also at macro financial variables and competitiveness variables. And in this sense, we can say that the concept of fiscal sustainability has been significantly broadened with this kind of innovation, not only methodologically, but from a substantive point of view, because what we are saying here is that you look at variables like the current account, the net international investment position, also to assess fiscal risks. That was the big innovation of this. Another important thing that changed in 2012, and that is still applicable today, is the fact that we don't look any longer only at medium and long-term fiscal sustainability challenges, because clearly with the crisis we realized that we couldn't look at the medium term if the mess was happening in the short run. So, I mean, what we did is that we changed our concept of fiscal sustainability to include the analysis of challenges that tackle the 3 time dimensions, I mean, the short, the medium, and the long run. And that will become clearer. I mean, as you will see afterwards, I will introduce the kind of analytical tools that we use to measure this concept of fiscal sustainability, and you will see that all 3 time dimensions are now covered in the fiscal sustainability assessment framework. So the way we call this is a multidimensional approach to fiscal sustainability in the sense that it looks at more than one time dimension. Okay? When you see this in our documents, it means that we simply cover the 3 short, medium, and long run. And this kind of approach, when it was introduced in 2012, it received also, I would say, a warm welcoming from the ECOFIN Council. Of course, every 3 years, when we produce this flagship publication, the Fiscal Sustainability Report, we have council conclusions on the report that transmit, and communicate, let's say, the main findings of our analytical work. And at that time, when we did this kind of innovative, we introduced this innovative element into our assessment framework, the ECOFIN Council, welcomed it and also asked the Commission services to pursue further along this way, refining the methodology for the assessment of short-term fiscal risks. That was the new development in this context. Okay, so now that I have sort of provided an overview, of the elements that are included in this concept of fiscal sustainability according to the way this is used in our services, I will go to the building blocks. What are the building blocks that are used to come up with the indicators and to come up with conclusions on fiscal sustainability? First of all, these tools rely on Commission, Directorate-General Economic and Financial Affairs, macroeconomic forecasts. So every time that we come up with this analysis, the results of the indicators, the update is done based on the latest Commission forecasts available. Of course, the Fiscal Sustainability Report, if you want to look at everything that is published on this, is always based on, let's say, every 3 years on the latest Commission forecast round, but that doesn't mean that in the meantime, of course, our analysis is updated along the way, though we don't publish a report. Every time now, especially in the context of the European semester, where all these elements, as you will see at the end, become particularly relevant, the update is done. In fact, we do it even 3 times a year, because the GECFIN updates the forecast with this kind of timing. An important assumption that needs to be kept in mind is the fact that after the forecast horizon, we need, of course, to assume something with regard to how fiscal policy will go into the future. And the assumption is a very conservative one, which is pretty, I would say, traditional in this kind of economic literature, that is a no fiscal policy change assumption. So we assume that fiscal policy is going to remain over the future as it was in the last forecasted year. So as I said, I'm not going too much into this. The long-term budgetary projections on pensions, healthcare, long-term care costs are included into this. And these are based on Eurostat demographic projections, the Europe 2030. The work, in fact, is joined between Commission and Member States. These kind of long-term projections are run jointly in the context of this aging working group, which is a working group of the Economic Policy Committee. Okay, so now I'm getting to the tools. The tools, how do we transform this definition of fiscal sustainability into analytical tools that are able to measure this concept? As I said, we have the 3 dimensions. As you can see, the fiscal sustainability indicators are 3. They're labeled as 0, S1, S2, and they cover respectively the short, the medium, and the long run. I want just to open a bracket here, then I'm not entering too much into it. An innovation that was introduced with the Fiscal Sustainability Report 2015 is the integration of the public debt sustainability analysis in the measurement of medium-term fiscal sustainability challenges. So previously, we already had these 2 kind of frameworks, public debt sustainability analysis on one side, fiscal sustainability indicators on the other. This will become clear maybe in the next slides. What we did with the Fiscal Sustainability Report 2015 was simply to integrate the 2 to be able to reach an assessment about risks in the medium term for individual member states. But in this presentation, I will focus mostly on the fiscal sustainability indicators because those are the most relevant in terms of policy advice. Okay, so very briefly, I will go tool by tool, not entering too many details. In case if there are questions, we can discuss it later or bilaterally even. The S0 indicator, as I said, is the tool that is used to measure fiscal sustainability risks in the short run. It's a composite indicator that includes 28 variables that are of fiscal and macrofinancial nature. And it's a tool that relies on this kind of methodology that is called the signals approach, that was pioneered by Kaminsky and Reinhardt, that has become, I would say, pretty widespread now in international organizations. It has some very interesting features that were very appealing, in fact, for policymakers. I mean, this is already used in the IMF, it's used by the ECB, it's used by us. And it's a methodology that allows you, in fact, to endogenously set critical thresholds of risk. So with this, I'm not entering the details of this, but I'm just saying that for each of the variables, the 28 variables included in the indicator, as well as for the indicator itself, this methodology allows you to optimally set a threshold of risk beyond which you can say, well, the country is facing short-term risks to fiscal sustainability, or not. So this is the kind of binary considerations that are allowed by the methodology. And this is done simply by looking at how the variables behaved over the past. So you look at how each individual variable behaved ahead of fiscal stress events in the past, and you draw conclusions. So when the value of the indicator is above the threshold, it signals risks to fiscal sustainability in the short run. So the S0 indicator, the only thing I want to mention here is that given the way it is constructed, the S0 indicator is higher, the higher the number of variables between the 28 variables that are sending fiscal stress signals for the future, and also the higher the predictive power of the individual variables, which is again assessed by looking at how the variables performed in the past. This is what you get. This is the S0 indicator, the way it was published in the Fiscal Sustainability Report 2015. You can see there reported the values for 2 years, 2009, 2015. Clearly, it shows nicely, I mean, how much, I mean, the overall risks of short-term fiscal stress has receded from 2009 compared to now. 2009, by the way, I mean, was indicating risks for 2010. As I said, I mean, the risks, if you take the value of the indicator at time t, this always gives you an assessment of fiscal stress risks for time t+1. So when you look at 2009, values of the indicator that were indicating risks for 2010, 2015 indicates risks for 2016, okay? Don't look for Greece, because we are not going to find it. But the fact is that in our publications, we report results only for non-program countries. So in the FSR, in the Fiscal Sustainability Report 2015, the 2 countries that were excluded were Greece and Cyprus, because at that time, at the time of the production of the report, also Cyprus was a program country. Okay, so now I'm getting to the other 2 indicators that are, I would say, the more traditional tools used in fiscal sustainability analysis, the S1 and S2 indicators. The S1 looks at the medium-term challenges, S2 at the long-term challenges. The S1 is practically, to provide like, so to say, a definition that is as less technical as possible, it's the improvement, I would say, it's the fiscal adjustment that is needed in terms of government balance expressed in structural terms, I mean, cleaned from the cycle, for those that are interested in that, that is needed over 5 years to be able to reach the 60% public debt to GDP ratio in 2030. So it's a medium-term indicator. I mean, talking about medium-term in a bit of a broad way, I would say, in the sense that we look at an adjustment over the next 5 years, and that's where the medium-term becomes relevant, but to reach a target in quite far away in 2030, and the 60%, of course, is the treaty reference value. For the S2 indicator, on the contrary, the definition is of fiscal adjustment that is needed, always in terms of government balance in structural terms, to stabilize the public debt to GDP ratio. So not to have an explosive path of public debt over GDP in the future, I mean, without specifying a specific target date. I mean, this infinite horizon looks a bit fancy, but for us economists, it's simply a way of translating into words a simple mathematical condition that doesn't have any target date, but it refers to the future in an indefinite way. So, I mean, this just very briefly, I mean, what are the components of the indicators, because it becomes interesting when I show to you the graphs. Both the S1 and S2 indicators have a component that is called initial budgetary position that tells you how far is the current balance of the government from the one that would allow you to stabilize the debt to GDP ratio. Then both indicators have the aging component. As I said, I mean, implicit liabilities related to aging are included in our projections. So you see both of them, they have the aging cost component into it that tells you, I mean, how much of the required fiscal adjustment to be sustainable in the medium or long run is related to the development of aging expenditure, how, I mean, your pension system, healthcare system, the kind of costs that they trigger over the future. Plus, the S1 indicator, of course, has a component that is related to the debt ratio target in 2030, which becomes particularly relevant for countries that have high debt to GDP ratio currently. And these are the results. So the S1 indicator, the medium-term indicator, I mean, as you can see, the black bar is the value of the overall indicator. And as you can see, that comes out of the result of summing up algebraically, I mean, summing all the components. And you can see that the value of the indicator, given that the fact that it can be decomposed in additive components, you can see also how much of it is related to aging, how much to the debt ratio requirement. We are here in the medium term, so the 60% debt ratio requirement by 2030, and how much is due to the initial budgetary position. I mean, if you take, for instance, the case of Italy, you can see that the red part, that is the debt ratio requirement, so the fact of seeing how far Italy is from reaching the debt ratio target in 2030 is huge. So most of the value of the indicator is, of course, as you would expect with the debt ratio above 130% of GDP, is related to that. Whereas, for instance, the light blue part, which is the aging cost component, contributes to a reduction of the value of the indicator. It's below the axis, thanks to the pension reforms that have been introduced over the years by the country. The initial budgetary position, of course, is also contributed to a reduction of it, because Italy, with such a big debt to GDP ratio, is obliged to stay with a primary balance, which is pretty substantial. And at that time, here we are talking about the Fiscal Sustainability Report 2015, I think it was something like 3.5, 3.7 even of percent of GDP, which is big. If you look at the S2 indicator, so long-term challenges, you have even the information disentangled even more than before, because you can see also within the aging cost component how much is related to pensions, how much to healthcare and long-term care. I mean, of this fiscal adjustment that is needed to be sustainable in the long run. If you take, for instance, take Slovenia, which is the most problematic case, you see that most of the fiscal adjustment is related, for instance, to the aging component. I mean, the really huge part of it is related to that. And both of them, pensions and healthcare systems, are triggering quite substantial costs over the future. So there you really have an issue with sustainability based on age-related expenditure. So these are the kind of considerations that these kind of tools allow you to make, and you can realize already since now why they become particularly relevant in the context of surveillance in the European semester, because they allow you to provide some kind of advice in terms of structural, what we call structural fiscal reforms on pensions and healthcare systems. Okay, so this I'm going to fly over this. It's, of course, I mean, all this is then summarized in an overall assessment by country, and where we classify and we sort of assign a level of risk to individual member states, high, medium, or low, based on where these indicators lie relatively to thresholds. And this is what we end up with. I mean, this is what we published in the Fiscal Sustainability Report. As you can see now, the novelty relative to the past is that for the medium-term classification, you can see whether this classification as high or medium risk is related either to the S1 indicator or to public debt sustainability analysis. Okay, as you can see, I mean, the conclusions were pretty critical for the medium term, where you have more than 10 countries that are at high risk. For the long-term, things looked a bit more positive, with only Slovenia being on the high side, but quite a number of countries being at medium risk. Okay, now, how are these indicators feeding into our policy processes? I mean, all this is particularly relevant in the context of what we call the European semester, which is the European Union's integrated cycle of economic and budgetary coordination, and with I mean, it's a sort of innovation that was introduced also in the context of the crisis with the purposes that you see indicated there. I mean, the idea was to be able in this context of identifying economic and social challenges ahead and also guiding member states in the implementation of their policies through the provision of these country-specific recommendations. They cover practically everything. I mean, one of the advantages of the European semester is that different policy processes were brought together, processes that were separated before. So now fiscal processes, macroeconomic processes under the macroeconomic imbalances procedure, as well as structural reforms that are related to the Europe 2020 strategies are brought together with sort of course exploiting synergies in analysis and also being consistent in terms of advice provided to member states in the different areas. Okay, so now all this process starts with the annual growth survey in November each year, where the broad economic policy priorities are identified. But I want to focus mostly on the next steps, because this is what is relevant for fiscal sustainability analysis. So the country-specific recommendations that are proposed, I mean, these are Commission proposals for Council recommendations when they are produced by us, by the Commission services, that provide concrete policy advice to Member States in May each year that cover, as I said, the whole spectrum that I have already mentioned. And these are the results of interactions, I mean, very intense interactions between different Directorate-Generals. So it's not just economic and financial department, but it's also employment policies, it's about growth strategies. I mean, it's a lot of services of Director-Generals that interact to produce these outcome. And these are underpinned by some kind of analytical, documents of a more analytical nature that are the staff working documents where you provide the analysis that is underpinning the policy advice. So where are the sustainability indicators that I've described before fitting into all this picture? I mean, first of all, the indicators themselves, I mean, even the values and the kind of risk assessment is provided in the staff working documents. So in these documents, they support the policy advice. And the idea of all this is that this provides input into decisions on the country-specific recommendations. So it's important to understand what is the specific role of these tools. I mean, these tools do not trigger kind of immediate policy reactions in the sense of what you can think of for the Stability and Growth Pact, the SGP. So it's not like fiscal surveillance that you read in terms of limit to the government budget or to public debt that trigger automatically some kind of actions by the Commission services that eventually can lead also to sanctions once agreed at EU level. These are more, the nature of these tools is more kind of analytical tools that allow you to analyze the situation. I mean, the fiscal sustainability challenges the member states are facing, and based on an economic understanding of the challenges, provide policy advice into the whole process that then feeds into the formulation of the country-specific recommendations. So based on these three elements, practically we have a horizontal fiscal sustainability assessment framework that is provides a horizontally consistent first screening of member states and challenges they face, on this specific policy challenge. And then, of course, this kind of assessment is used to go more into depth in the country specificities. Because, of course, if you say, this indicator highlights that there is an issue with pension systems or healthcare systems, then you want to understand where exactly this issue is coming from. And then you need a lot of country-specific expertise to be able to dig into the functioning of the systems. Okay? So this is the way these tools are practically used, to have a first horizontally consistent screening from which then you go into the specificity. And this is my last slide that in fact reinforces this kind of message. So that the fiscal sustainability assessment framework practically entails two steps. One allows you to identify where fiscal sustainability challenges arise, so whether a member state is facing sustainability challenges in the short, medium, and long run, and then to tell you also what is the nature as a second step of the challenge. Does it relate to pension systems, to healthcare, to long-term care systems? Is the competitiveness or macro-financial side that creates issues in the short term, or is it the fiscal side? But that by no means wants to preempt the final selection of the country-specific recommendations. So don't think that you look at our framework, you look at the country-specific recommendations, and you say, okay, the S2 indicator highlights issues on pension systems, but the country-specific recommendation is not taking this up. Why? It's not that you have an inconsistency there, is that the indicator was used, that is published, and so you can look at that, was used by the Commission services to first highlight issues with that, and then those issues were analyzed by the country experts in the Commission services, and eventually they found out that there were some other considerations of a qualitative nature even sometimes that cannot be captured by a quantified kind of approach like this, that allowed you to say, okay, there are risks, but these are milder than they look from our measure, because this measure is not able to capture qualitative considerations that are not into the picture. So in this sense, I want to say these tools do not preempt the final section of the country-specific recommendations, but they simply feed into a first screening of countries, based on which then you go into more in-depth analysis. And with this, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Katia, for a very clear and structured presentation and for respecting our time limit. Unless there are urgent comments or questions, I would like to continue with our next speaker. I don't see any hands raised, so I would like to very briefly introduce Mrs. Christine Kormann, who will speak to us on the communication of official statistics. Christine is responsible for the streamlining and modernization of EU statistics at Eurostat in the framework of the project DigiCom. This involves not only Eurostat, but also a cooperation with 18 national statistical institutes. She particularly focuses on users, digital media, open data, and communication. Christine has a long experience in statistical dissemination at Eurostat, where she has been the head of user support compendium publications, and she was also the head of Eurostat's dissemination section when Eurostat launched its free dissemination policy. Previously, Christine worked for 7 years in DG Communication Networks, Content and Technology of the European Commission, in particular on digital literacy, internet safety, and the use of social media by young people. Christine has a graduate degree in business administration and a Master of Arts in international politics. Christine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thanks for inviting Eurostat to this debate. I think your introduction, you mentioned who produces, and I think as we are one of the key producers, it's really nice for us to be part of this discussion. So, as you mentioned, I will report on dissemination of official statistics, and in particular in the use for evidence-based policy making. I propose to start with a short introduction on Eurostat, even if I assume that most of you already know, but I think it's nice to put the basics first. And then I will move to our specific role to support evidence-based policy in the EU. And then I will move to the more particular project that I'm running at the moment, which is about modernizing our dissemination and communication, and also some related Eurostat work in the context of indicators, which I think is relevant in our debate today. So, first, what is Eurostat? So we are the statistical office of the European Union. We are one of the Commission Directorate-General, but we are also the central institution of the European statistical system, which is composed also of the national statistical institutes. Our mission, which was recently renewed, is that we provide high-quality statistics for Europe. And we actually are in the course of developing a motto which is trusted statistics, informed Europeans, and better decisions. So our role in decision making is really key, and we also believe that it's our role for supporting the decisions by policymakers, but very much as well to inform citizens, so that there is also an accountability aspect, and that citizens can also make their own judgment about statistics. and about the policy results as well. So we also are conscious that there are various sources and increasing number of sources and complexity of information outside, and our ambition is also to make a difference in this ocean of information. I just mentioned the European statistical system. So in fact, it is a partnership which with Eurostat and all national statistical institutes in the EU, and also other national authorities that have a specific role in the production of official statistics. So this is foreseen in our basic regulation, which is the regulation 2023 on European statistics. How does this partnership work? At the ESS level, so at the European and national level, we together develop the harmonization of methodologies, concepts, and classifications. And then the national statistical offices are responsible for the data collection. Eurostat does, in principle, not do any data collection. There are a few exceptions. But we are in charge of the consolidation of the data, the production of European aggregates, validation, and publication, dissemination of these statistics. A very important aspect is the quality side. So European statistics are based on a quality framework, and we have self-regulatory code of practice that is respected by Eurostat and the national statistical offices, and it's based on 15 principles. I will not go in detail through each of the principles, but basically the first third of the principles are about the institutional environment and includes aspects such as the professional independence, adequacy of resources, confidentiality, statistical confidentiality, impartiality. The parts in the middle are the principles that are related to the statistical processes, so the way we produce on the methodological aspects and our procedures. And the last part of these principles are actually the quality of the statistical outputs. So the quality of our statistics as we produce them, so they need to be relevant, accurate, timely, coherent, and accessible. So this European Statistics Code of Practice is really an important tool for us, and it's assessed through peer reviews of the national statistical institutes and Eurostat. In still this introductory phase, I would also like to mention an important aspect in its element, which is the European Statistical Program. Most of the data that we produce is based on individual regulations, but we also have an overarching multi-annual program, which is based on a regulation of the European Parliament and the Council. So that means the what we produce is actually also the fruit of the legislative process involving the Parliament and the Council, and this is really important. This statistical program provides so the legislative framework for the production and dissemination of European statistics. It defines for 5 years, and now we are in the extension, preparing already the extension until 2020 of the main areas in which we are developing work on statistics. The first objective, I mean, there are 4 main objectives of this program. And the first one is actually really saying that we develop statistical information to support development, monitoring, and evaluation of the policies of the Union. So this is really the scope of our work. The European Statistical Program also defines the statistical information infrastructure. And I would like really to stress this because it's really a conceptual development that has been made since the beginning of the current program that we are running, which started in 2013, where the data that we produce really is structured in different layers in this pyramid. So We start from the data part, which is the basis, and this is the traditional statistics that national statistical institutes have produced for many years, which are survey-based, like the labor force survey or the census. I mean, so all the sort of basic statistics. However, and this can be used, it's what we call multi-purpose. They can be used for many different things. Then at the middle of the pyramid, we have accounting systems, which are basically the balance sheets, so they can be either the national accounting systems, so which lead to the GDP, for example, or we're also developing economic environment account systems. So these are also developed largely by the national statistical institutes and Eurostat, and they're also multi-purpose. I think the difference is with the top of the pyramid, where there we speak about indicators. And then indicators, they are for specific purposes. So the idea in our program is that we really define and we have a stable production on data and accounting systems. And then the indicators, they can be built on those data and accounting systems depending on the policy needs. And they are very specific to then the policy needs. An example, you can have nominal GDP, and then if the question is has your economy grown, then as indicator you would have the seasonally adjusted GDP growth. But if your question is how much have we invested in innovation, research and development, then you can have out of the same accounting R&D expenditure as percentage of GDP. So indicators are much more flexible, but they're also much more policy related, and this is where I think we can then also continue in terms of the debate afterwards, where our role in data and accounting system is more the traditional role of statisticians, whereas the role in indicator is much closer in dialogue with policymaker and science, and this is really one of the big evolutions in the last years. So let's move now to our specific role to support evidence-based policy in the EU. Well, almost all EU policies draw heavily on official statistics. Internal market policy, budgetary policy, enlargement, sectoral policies. Some examples. First, I mean, to illustrate also the importance of comparable statistics, because as one of our also quality criteria, of course, at the, working at the European level is the comparability of the statistics that we produce, and this is a big part of our harmonization, our role in harmonizing methodologies. So there are some statistics which are important insofar as they really relate to automatic decisions. An example of this is the regional GDP per capita, which directly relates to the allocation of structural funds. Another example is the role of statistics in the preparation and evaluation of policies and for democratic control. And also well-known examples is the Europe 2020 indicators, which are really a combination of indicators related to employment, education, poverty, climate and energy, and resource and development. Now we are working as you know, under the 10 political priorities of the Commission and actually of the EU, and we have done a mapping. I mean, initially when these 10 priorities were developed, Eurostat did really a mapping of the statistical support we could provide to these 10 priorities. But now we are also going, and you can see here the result of the mapping, that we really have statistics for all the priorities. But we also now involved I mean, the way the Commission DGs are working on their annual plan and strategic multi-annual plan. They also develop some key indicators there to monitor these policies, and we are now involved with all the DGs and with the Secretariat-General of the Commission on the selection of the impact indicators for these 10 priorities. one of the framework, indicators work based on different frameworks, and in this context, on the work we're now doing on the 10 priorities, we are using this project framework with inputs, outputs, outcome, and impact indicators. And in fact, the area where Eurostat indicators are mostly requested are for the impact indicators of the policies, whereas the input indicators for these policies would be more related to sort of internal information from the different Directorate-General about resources, and outputs would be also monitored directly by the Directorate-Generals. So, for example, in this example, the input indicator would be the proportion of the budget. The output indicator would be the number of schools built. Outcome indicator, the school enrollments, and the impact indicator, literacy rates. So here we would, for example, provide only the impact indicator. Finally, in this section of the inputs, I would like to mention the macroeconomic imbalance procedure that was also mentioned previously by my colleague, and really to say that all these indicators said they have really been strengthened by, following the economic and financial crisis. And in particular, there was the number of policy initiatives that were made with the reinforced economic agenda, the Europe 2020, the Europe Plus, and in particular the European semester. So what is, in particular, in the macroeconomic imbalance procedure has been launched since 2011. This is a European Commission procedure based on scoreboards, but it is actually Eurostat which provides the statistical annex of the macroeconomic imbalance procedure scoreboards, and there are 14 of these indicators. The thresholds are defined by the Commission, but this list of the headline indicators, you can see the detailed indicators concerning external imbalance, internal imbalances, and employment, and most of them, they are actually provided by Eurostat. Maybe building up on what was also mentioned before, there were new indicators developed after the crisis, and in particular concerning house prices, as it was analyzed that as part of the lack of alert before the crisis, the price of houses was missing. It could have been an interesting way to anticipate the crisis. So Eurostat has been asked to develop a specific indicator, and now we have quarterly indicator on house prices, which really serves also in this context. So we have really reacted as well with new indicators after the crisis. Okay, so these are examples of how we are supporting EU policies, also of the trend towards more indicators scoreboards. So reacting to this and to other challenges, we have now launched in the beginning of this year a project called Digicom, which is about modernizing communication and dissemination. As I mentioned, we have Eurostat and the European Statistical System have made an assessment of the challenges that affect official statistics, and they can be grouped in 4 areas. First is the data revolution with emergence of new data sources and also competition among data providers. The second type of challenges is the new metrics. Some of the areas that we deal with, they are really complex to grasp with statistics, in particular globalization, for example, or also the digitalization of the economy. A third type of challenge is the price of statistics and the trade-offs we have to make between the quality of the statistics and the resources we put on them. And finally, what is put under the future of Europe, clearly the enhanced economic governance and the push towards evidence-based policy making has given us a lot of visibility and also a lot of responsibility and a lot of new needs that we need to manage. So, in order to face these challenges, the European Statistical System decided in 2014 to develop a common vision, which we call the ESS Vision 2020, and has identified 5 main areas for action. These are to focus more on users, to strive for quality, to harness new data sources such as big data, to promote efficiency in production processes, and to improve dissemination and communication. This Digicom project is the one project that contributes to 2 key areas: users focus and dissemination. It involves Eurostat and, as was mentioned in the introduction, 18 statistical institutes. It has 4 areas of work, and its main aim is to modernize the dissemination of European statistics. It's a 4-year project, and it has 4 areas of work. So the first area is called user analysis, and there we aim at fostering user engagement. So this is symbolized by the little Facebook icon, because part of the action will be to launch next week Facebook accounts, where we hope to have more interaction with our users. But of course it goes much deeper, and it's also about really structured dialogue with our key users. The second area of work is called innovative and shareable products, and here we hope to reach new users through visualization, and in particular visualization of indicators is really key. Okay, here you have an example of my country in a bubble, which is visualization we have developed that allows users in quite an easy way to position their country on various concerning various indicators. The third area of work is to foster open data dissemination, and we aim to empower users to really also reuse data for also the key redisseminators. And finally, we aim to also stimulate statistical literacy. We are working on some experiments to see how we can disseminate statistics which are not yet in a mature stage, but to interact already with users about this sort of new statistics. And we will also organize a hackathon. In the user engagement, I think some important reflection that we're having is really how do we need to and when do we need to engage with users. So this is an attempt to map a little bit the possibilities. But in the policy cycle, there are moments where we need to provide different kind of input, and some inputs can be really pure official statistics. Some others may be more also related to forecasts, to scenarios, or to more scientific advice. So, for example, at the problem analysis stage, there is really a need for both indicators and science and economics, whereas, for example, at the target setting stage, we need to work on scenarios, and in the monitoring stage on indicators. So this is not only a work for official statisticians, but we need really to position our role here in these different steps. Related to our second area of action, so we will develop visualizations, as we believe it's a powerful way to communicate statistics and indicators. Here there are already some existing visualizations, so concerning economic trends, quality of life, and although it's not very visible there, but this thing with the map and the lights is a very nice new digital publication that we have issued, which is on energy statistics. And in fact, it is the first time we do a pure digital publication. It's not a PDF. It's a really digital experience, and it's essentially for basic users, with some items that can be more for more specialist users. And we have decided to do it on this topic because also it's one of the key EU policies about the energy union. And so it's also our contribution. You have this this policy, the Energy Union, and we provide sort of a nice publication that can be reached. I mean, the expectation that it reaches also some more basic users who can also then get more enlightened judgments about what's going on in this area. In the open data, well, we believe that open data really are fundamental for your open societies, and statistics are really a cornerstone of public open data. And in particular, for the EU, we have a portal, which is the EU Open Data Portal, and actually our statistics are really account for the bulk of data of this portal. This portal is managed by the Publications Office, but Eurostat's data sets are really a huge part of this open data portal. And what we aim to in this project is to enhance access to statistics in open formats, and really to enable the reuse of data and its interoperability. So that's it's also used by other analysts, so that it goes really with a very wide audience. And then finally, on statistical literacy, here I think over the last 2-3 years, there is really a recognition by the words of official statisticians that we need to move in this direction. I think before it was always a nice to have, but we don't really dedicate so much resources to it. But I think now we are moving in a time where we consider that it's really critical to ensure that individuals can benefit from the power of data. So it's not only about basic knowledge of statistical information, it's also about knowing the limits of the use and misuse. So I think this is also relevant to our topic today. And what we aim at is to develop the capabilities to understand statistics, also for the citizens. So here, as part of the project, this year we have done an inventory of national practices, what national institutes do in terms of literacy. And this has been compiled in what we call a statistical literacy grid, where we can really map the initiatives per target group from the primary school to universities. And also there are other actions that can be for journalists or even for policymakers. So this just is an illustration of two examples. One is a portal in Portugal, which aims also at statistical literacy. And the one on the right is a specific portal in Germany from the Statis for students, which is called Statistic Campus. So we will build also on these national practices. And the second item there is the work we are doing for indicators. And again, I think Eurostat has realized in the last years that we don't need only to do methodological work on statistics themselves, but also a lot more thinking about the indicators. And we are developing a series of handbooks and manuals. One is already issued, and I would really encourage you to have a look at it. And they are about really typologies of indicators, and we are really working on also how to communicate better on indicators. And we are really reflecting on our role as official statisticians in this context. And next year we will develop further tools on statistical literacy, in particular a website called Statistics for Beginners, and we will also work on measuring impact. I would like to finish with a bit of thoughts that I guess can be followed up in the discussion. Over the years, we are really moving on reflection on the role of statisticians, particularly concerning indicators for policy making. We realize that with a stronger reliance on scoreboards and indicators, there is much more visibility to our indicators, and this visibility and influence means also more responsibility. So we are really in the course of investigating how these services are used, the ethical implications as well, and also the impact on the evidence that we produce. So we aim at having this balanced approach between the world of statisticians, the world of politics and the world of science, which can each play a specific role in the elaboration of the indicators, and then also in the interpretation of indicators and in the review of the indicator scheme. So in that context, we are developing a series of handbooks. We are having workshops as well, and I think it would be really nice also to have probably some of you involved in this discussion. What we believe is that the role of the statistical community is to help in the selection of the appropriate indicators, to define international standards and ensure quality, and to provide the indicators for monitoring. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. And of course, your own slides were a brilliant demonstration of beautiful information dissemination. It is a great pleasure that we can now welcome Vice President Pașcu, who joined us coming from a probably too short visit of beautiful Villa Salviati. But he will from now on take part in our discussions. Welcome to the first panel.
Thank you very much.
And if there are no urgent questions or comments, I would like to proceed to our next speaker, Daniel Schrath-Tischler. Daniel is a senior expert at the Bertelsmann Stiftung. He joined the Stiftung in 2008 and now heads the Sustainable Governance Indicators Project, which is, among other things, responsible for the SIM Index report. Daniel holds a PhD in political science from the University of Cologne, and from 2004 to 2008 he was research associate at the Jean Monnet Chair for Political Science, chaired by Professor Wolfgang Wessels at the University of Cologne. Daniel has published widely on topics such as social justice in the European Union, sustainable governance indicators, and comparative analyses of public policy making. If I'm correctly informed, our director, Brigitte Lafan, may have to leave us fairly soon. No? Okay, very good. Excellent. So I hand over to Daniel.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. And yeah, the organizers, especially Gabi, asked me, we are old friends from the time at the chair of Professor Wessels in Cologne. She asked me to speak about the approach and also about some of the key findings of our so-called social justice index for EU countries, which the Bertelsmann Stiftung publishes every year since 2014. And well, the Bertelsmann Stiftung, in German, the Bertelsmann Foundation, is one of the largest private operating foundations in Germany. I think we have now more than 300 employees, and we are politically independent, a non-partisan think tank, so we are not linked to any political party in Germany. And last year in October, we published our social justice index for all EU countries for the second time, and we received many positive reactions, not only in the media, but also from policymakers in European capitals, from the institutions in Brussels. And also, by a coincidence, I think, shortly after the release of our study, Jean-Claude Juncker said in the European Parliament, I want Europe to be dedicated to being AAA on social issues as much as it is to being AAA in the financial and economic sense. And however, the results of our study from last year and also the results of our new Social Justice Index 2016, which is going to be published next week, actually, show that the EU and its member states are still quite far away from a state of social justice that would really justify a AAA rating on social issues. The Social Justice Index is based on selected quantitative and qualitative indicators that we use and collect within the framework of the Sustainable Governance Indicators project, which you already mentioned. This is a very broad, major international index project that we conduct at the Bertelsmann Foundation for assessing all OECD and EU countries on a very broad set of indicators. In total, we use around 140 indicators. And we have just taken some of these indicators to construct this specific social justice index for EU countries. And if you like, you can download the full study, the full report, which is quite comprehensive, and I have also one copy at least with me, at our website, which is sgi-network.org. So all data and the full report is completely freely accessible there. Just a few remarks on the theoretical background or the normative assumptions of this study and the analytical approach. I know that social justice is a very difficult term, and defining what social justice means is very often clearly subject to controversy. Nevertheless, I think that a concept of social justice that refers to the aim of realizing de facto equal opportunities for each individual offers a conceptual ideal that many people, also from different ideological strands, should be able to subscribe to. And our approach of measuring social justice is informed by this normative assumption, and it covers 6 dimensions. I think it's not visible over there, but I will just explain what you should be able to see there. Each dimension is measured by several indicators. As I said at the beginning, we use 36 indicators, and for the most part, we draw on data from public official statistics, mainly from Eurostat, of course, but also to some extent from the OECD. And next to these quantitative indicators that we apply here, we also make use of some of our expert assessments that we collect in the framework of our Sustainable Governance Indicators project, where we really rely on a very broad network of experts, more than 100 scientists working for us in this Sustainable Governance Indicators project. But only a minor part of these indicators that we use in the Social Justice Index is based on expert assessments. Really, the majority of indicators, or the data that we use for the indicators, is from Eurostat or the OECD. The first dimension is the prevention of poverty. The effective prevention of poverty plays a key role in measuring social justice, because under conditions of poverty, social participation and a self-determined life are almost impossible. So the prevention of poverty is in a certain sense a necessary precondition for measuring social justice, and that's why we have also assigned quite heavy weight for this dimension of the index. So it's, at the end, it's a composite index, as you will see. The second dimension is equal access to good quality education. This is certainly also a very important factor in providing equal opportunities and life chances. Social or cultural background must not be allowed to negatively affect educational success, and that's why we look in this area, among others, at for instance, the impact of a student's socioeconomic background on his or her educational success, the rate of early school leavers, the aspect of pre-primary education, the number of low-educated people, as well as at the level of inclusiveness of educational systems generally. The third dimension here is labor market inclusiveness, which is also of great importance to measuring social justice as far as we understand it. Exclusion from the labor market limits individual opportunities for self-realization, contributes to an increase in the risk of poverty, and can even lead to serious health problems. And in this dimension of labor market inclusiveness, we use 11 different indicators on employment and unemployment, broken down to different social and age groups. So, for example, we look at long-term unemployment, youth unemployment, or with regard to the question of precarious working conditions, we also included indicators such as low pay incidents among low-skilled workers, or the number of people who are involuntarily employed on temporary working contracts. So it's quite a broad set of indicators for measuring opportunities or access conditions to the labor market. The fourth dimension is called social cohesion and non-discrimination, where we try to examine the extent to which trends towards social polarization, exclusion, and the discrimination of specific groups are successfully countered. Here, for instance, we look at aspects of gender equality, income polarization, the effectiveness of anti-discrimination policies, as well as at policies for promoting the integration of migrants into society. So this is what we look at in this dimension. And the next one, the fifth dimension, is on health. In this area, we assess each country's healthcare system with regard to the criteria of inclusiveness and also the quality of healthcare services. And finally, the last dimension of this measurement tool tries to approach the issue of intergenerational justice, and this dimension is composed of, or comprised of three major components. The first component addresses policy support for both younger and older generations in terms of an assessment of family and pension policies in each country. The second component focuses on the idea of environmental sustainability by using indicators such as greenhouse gas emissions, the share of renewable energy. And the third component is concerned with economic and fiscal sustainability. And here we look at the level, for instance, of national debt as a mortgage to be paid by future generations. And we also included as one proxy indicator the level of spending on research and innovation as a potential investment in future prosperity, so to speak. And this is, in a nutshell, very briefly, our approach of measuring social justice. And when combining and aggregating all these dimensions, we get this overall picture. It's also too small, I think, but again, I will explain what you should see there. So this is just the overall ranking, and I should say that in the report, which is really comprehensive, we of course go down to every single indicator, which is much more interesting than looking just at this highly aggregated level, because you always lose a lot of information when you just combine everything. But nevertheless, for communication purposes, and this is also quite important when disseminating such kind of studies, it makes sense to have some kind of overall league table, as always. And at the top of this overall ranking, we find the Nordic countries, not so surprising, certainly the Czech Republic, which is quite interesting, maybe, as well as the Netherlands. And at the bottom of the list, we mainly have the Southern European crisis states and some Southeastern European countries. Greece comes in on last place in terms of social justice, which is certainly also not so surprising. What is already more interesting than this overall distribution of countries is the fact that the state of social justice has clearly deteriorated in the broad majority of EU countries compared to the pre-crisis situation. And there are only very few exceptions, mainly Poland and Germany, showing a positive trend also during the years of the crisis. And however, there are now some signs of hope that the majority of EU countries is now recovering not only in economic terms but also in social terms. It appears that after years of decline, the majority of countries reached their lowest point between 2012 and 2014. And for the first time since the crisis began 8 years ago, the state of social justice has slightly improved in most EU countries, according to our measurement tool at least. However, I should repeat that the level of social justice is still a long way behind pre-crisis levels in almost all EU countries. And the slight improvement that we can observe is due primarily to an upward trend on the labor markets. And nevertheless, it's not yet possible to talk of a real trend reversal in the area of social justice for all countries. For instance, although countries like Spain appear to be stabilizing in economic terms, social justice levels in countries such as Spain and Greece remain really shockingly low, according to the recent data that we used. So huge problems remain. There's still a massive social divide within the EU between North and South. To be sure, social inclusion in Sweden, Finland, Denmark, also the Netherlands has also declined slightly over the last years, but social injustice in countries such as Greece, Spain, Italy, Ireland, also Hungary has massively increased over the last years. And apart from the social divide that we see between North and South in the EU, there's also a strong social imbalance between generations. This is also one of the main findings of this report, also in the last edition last year. Young people are much harder hit by social injustice than those who are older. For instance, we see that across Europe that the share of young people threatened by poverty or social exclusion has clearly increased over the last 8 years, while it has declined among elderly people. And this is a quite interesting and also, I think, problematic pattern that characterizes the broad majority of EU countries. And in total, we have now around 27% of all children and young people that are threatened by poverty or social exclusion in the EU. So using this headline indicator, social exclusion or at risk of poverty or social exclusion, that is also one of the headline indicators of the EU's 2020 strategy. Looking more closely at this poverty prevention dimension, we see regarding the imbalance between North and South that especially the poverty figures in countries like Greece and Spain are still alarming. These two countries have barely managed to reduce the proportion of people at risk of poverty or social exclusion compared with last year. The proportion of people in this category is nearly 30% in Spain and 36% in Greece even. Only Bulgaria and Romania fare worse in this regard, but at least these two countries show a positive trend in recent years. The poverty risk among children and young people in most of the crisis-hit southern European states has either fallen only slightly or in some cases has actually risen compared with last year. In Spain, we have more than 34% of children and young people that are threatened by poverty or social exclusion. In Portugal, the number is 30%. In Italy, the number has gone up again to 33.5%, and in Greece it's even more at 38%. And the proportion of children affected by severe material deprivation in Greece has more than doubled from around 10% in 2007 to now nearly 26%, which is really quite depressing development, I think. As I already said, it's particularly worrying that the gap between generations has widened considerably since the crisis began, while the proportion of children at risk of poverty or social exclusion has risen since 2008. And only slightly decreased since last year. The proportion of old people at risk of poverty or social exclusion has fallen constantly from around 24% in 2008 to now 70%. And this is due in part to the fact that in most countries, pensions and benefits for older people did not shrink as much as incomes for the younger population did during the crisis, if at all. Just going to the next dimension, which is access to education. Here we don't find such a strong imbalance between North and South, as was the case with poverty. Although also in this dimension, the top positions are held by Northern European countries and also some of the Baltic countries. Just picking out one indicator, looking at the key indicator here, the influence of a student's social background on his or her educational performance. This is least evident in Finland and Estonia. And at the same time, these two countries attained the best results in the last PISA survey of learning achievement levels, which shows that a high degree of social justice and a well-performing school and training system need not be incompatible goals. I think this is one of the main findings that we can draw from the comparison of educational opportunities in this study. Just a few remarks on the labor market access dimension. Overall, labor market access opportunities have clearly deteriorated in the broad majority of EU countries over the last years, especially, of course, in the crisis-struck southern European countries. However, the worst seems to be over now. On the European labor markets, we have now growing employment figures, decreasing unemployment rates, but we are still quite far away from the levels that we had before the crisis started. And in some countries, of course, the situation is still dramatic. In Greece, for instance, we have an overall employment rate that is just around 50%, which is really low. The overall unemployment rate is still at 25% in Greece. Youth unemployment is still at nearly 50%. Still quite a problematic picture in some, especially of the southern European countries. Although some successes in reducing youth unemployment are starting to become visible, youth unemployment as well is still far above pre-crisis levels. This is also something that should be mentioned here, I think. And apart from the still very problematic situation in many southern European countries, we also observe distinct trends in almost all countries towards a dual labor market with a growing low-wage sector, and that is also quite a quite problematic development, I think, despite the growing employment figures that we now see in the European Union, there is at the same time a growing number of people in full-time employment threatened by poverty. So in the EU as a whole, on average, this proportion rose from 7% in 2009 to nearly 8% in 2015, although we have now rising employment figures. In the area of social cohesion and non-discrimination, we see that tendencies towards discrimination and polarization are quite effectively prevented in the still comparatively egalitarian societies of the Nordic countries. However, even in these small and very homogeneous states, income polarization is increasing, especially in Sweden and Denmark. And moreover, particularly for people of foreign origin, labor market and educational opportunities are smaller than for natives and people without an immigrant background. And this is also quite interesting to see that also the Nordic countries have some problems in this regard, and not everything is brilliant in the Nordic countries, which are still the role models in terms of social inclusion policy, I think, but there are some deficiencies as well, of course. And moreover, also in this dimension, that should be mentioned, a number of EU countries show very significant tendencies towards discrimination against specific minorities. This is particularly true with regard to the Roma minority, who is subject to discrimination in many southeastern European countries mainly. So this is also part of the analysis in this dimension, if you would look into greater detail in the report itself. Very briefly, the findings in the health dimension, we see that the greatest shortcomings are evident in Romania and Latvia here. The massive underfunding of the Romanian healthcare system, for example, leads to broad treatment inequalities and corruption, and problems in Greece have taken a similar course. Here we have the harsh austerity measures in recent years that have led to drastic cuts in the healthcare system as well. And in addition, rising poverty means that many people are no longer in the position to undergo essential treatment. So, 5 minutes, I'm fine with it. In the last dimension, intergenerational justice, in the overall assessment of this dimension, we see that the Nordic countries and to some extent also the Baltic countries are clear leaders, although also the Nordic countries face significant demographic pressures. They best succeed in investing in opportunities for young people and families, for instance, by providing very good childcare infrastructure. And these countries also perform quite well in terms of environmental and fiscal sustainability, also with regard to investment in research and development. So that's why these countries are at the top of this ranking of this dimension. Overall, however, intergenerational justice has not improved within the EU on average. I already mentioned the growing gap between old and young in terms of poverty. But in addition, we also see that, despite the focus on budget consolidation, public debt is rising, which will certainly increase the fiscal burdens for future generations. On average, public debt has increased from around 60% in 2008 to now nearly 90% of GDP in 2015 in the EU on average. So debt is rising, taking also into account that the most EU countries are rapidly aging, the greatest shortcomings with regard to intergenerational justice, at least according to our measurement, are evident in the demographically very old and highly indebted states of Italy and Greece. So these two countries are the last ones in this league table. Just a few remarks on the relationship between social justice and economic prosperity in terms of GDP per capita. Just a very simple correlation here. We can see that economic prosperity is certainly an important requirement, but does not automatically guarantee social justice in the EU. That becomes quite clear when you look at countries such as the Czech Republic and also Slovenia, which rank quite high in terms of social justice levels. But these two countries have only only have average economic performance levels compared with other countries. So, for instance, Italy and Spain have a higher GDP per capita than countries like the Czech Republic and Slovenia, but Italy and Spain, as we have seen, fare much worse in terms of social justice than those two countries, like the Czech Republic and Slovenia. So it seems that sound policy-making, social policies really do matter in terms of improving the social situation and living standards of the people. Just a few conclusions, very briefly. I think the country comparison, also the new edition, which will come out next week, shows that the EU and its member states must do more, especially for children and young people, especially with regard to reducing youth unemployment, fighting child poverty, and certainly enhancing the transition from education to the labor markets. This is still a key challenge in many countries in the EU. The social divide between member states and between the generations can lead, I think, to tensions and a considerable loss of trust. So should the social imbalance last for long or increase even more in the future, I think that the future of the European integration project can be undermined or even threatened by this development. And that's why, from our point of view, the topic of social justice should play a greater role in European politics in the future. I think we have many different programs, measures, and coordination procedures at the European level. But as far as I see it, there's as yet no really an integrated, comprehensive strategy which really consistently and coherently combines the two key objectives, growth and social justice, which go hand in hand, from my point of view, this is not a trade-off, but is positive some relationship, and this is also something that comes out of our study, I think. So I leave it at that and the rest for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for these extremely important comparative data. And of course, these are data that have very high political salience. And we can only hope and work towards implementation at the political decision-making level. Thank you very much. No urgent comments or questions as far as I can see. So our last speaker for this panel will be Gabi Umbach, who, as you have seen, co-organized this conference with me. And Gabi is the founding director of the Global Stat database on developments in a globalized world, which, by the way, has been made accessible directly on the Parliament website a couple of weeks ago, if I'm not wrong. So we make use, particularly at DG EPRS, of this excellent database. At the Robert Schuman Center, Gabi co-directs several research projects, notably Global Governance by Indicators and Political Economy of Measuring State Capacity and Governance. And both of these programs are part of the Global Governance program at the Robert Schuman Center. Gabi holds a PhD in political science, also from the University of Cologne. And she also spent a few years as a senior research associate at the University of Cologne at the Jean Monnet Chair, which was already mentioned. Gabi has, of course, many publications on her record in fields such as European integration studies and theories, Europeanization, multi-level and new modes of governance, environmental, employment and socio-economic policies, and EU constitutionalization. Since she joined the Global Governance Program, she also got involved in database design, evidence-based policymaking, and global governance by indicators. And on a more personal note, I would like to add that it was really a very pleasurable experience to co-organize this conference with you. It was a perfect cooperation. Thank you very much. Gabi will speak to us on questions of transparency and democracy in evidence-based policymaking, among other things. Gabi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Wilhelm. Compliment warmly returned.
Thank you.
It still is a great pleasure, and I hope to be able to collaborate with you in the future. It was really a tremendous experience. And thank you all for coming, for accepting our invitation for what will be, what we hope, a very interesting and informed debate about how we structure policy and policy making within the EU, and on what sort of evidence and decisions we base our decisions within the European Union on. What I now try to do is to bring a bit the lines of the three presentations together to show you what we intended with the collection of the presentations for the first panel. They all gave us insight into the sophisticatedness of the production of evidence of different groups of data providers. We had an insight into Eurostat work on data collection, data harmonization, but also the translation of statistics into the public, data literacy infrastructure. An insight by Katia into institutional work on creating evidence on a very highly politicized policy area that feed into the institutional policy-making process of a key institution and the system of the EU as such, and by Daniel on the way in which research and stakeholders, institutions analyze policy based on statistical evidence and based on evidence, so that we had a full picture on how we produce different types of evidence for the political system of the EU. What I now want to try is to open up a bit the meta level of what we are going to discuss later on, and to bring the perspective a bit on issues and topics of transparency and democracy. How can these very sophisticated, very informed processes support transparency and democracy? Can they? Can't they? Is it too complicated for the normal citizen to be involved, for institutions that are not, whose daily bread it's not to deal with these calculation formulas, indicators-based processes, composite indicators versus dashboards approach, for whom this doesn't resonate and doesn't make any sense? Does this support these aspects of democratic policymaking that we discuss later on, and that Barend and Paul will focus on in their presentations as well. My evidence is empirical evidence, case study evidence that derives from a project that I was fortunate to co-lead here at the Robert Schuman Center, which was the Global Governance by Indicators project, in which also Katia and Daniel previously collaborated. And I'm happy that they were willing to come back again. I focus on three different aspects in my presentation: potential and problems of evidence-based policymaking, national implementation and adaptation as a source for transparency, and the use by civil society, which is a bit of a different thing, but relates very much back to what the essence of policymaking through the European Parliament also is about, and how we can activate citizens for these the creation of evidence. Let's put it like that. So, what is the potential of what we discussed today? As you saw, the potential is that we go beyond anecdotal evidence in policymaking, that these are the sources and the foundations for strategic planning. So common goals, as we decided in Paris COP21, within the Europe 2020 strategy, or within the Millennium Development Goals, they lay out the path of development and of progress, of strategic national government plannings. So in a way, we, by evidence-based policymaking, indicators-based processes, design the future path and portfolio of politics in a more structured way for a bigger group of countries and actors. As we saw with Daniel's presentation, we have a tool to measure performance of countries. We have a tool to, all the caveats that are there, to rank countries, for example, and to compare performance among countries, to compare also the benefit of certain policies vis-à-vis others under certain conditions, under certain contexts. So it's a strong element, a strong potential in performance assessment. Decision-making and policy instrument can even become more transparent because we deconstruct the single elements and the single components that lead a policy in the one direction or the other. We can analyze the different stakeholder elements, if you so wish, interest elements in a policy. So it becomes even more transparent. It can become more transparent what sort of policy element is informed by which source. They are drivers of innovation, as we saw. So we have policy instruments at hand with the open method of coordination in the beginning, with the coordination cycles in social policies and pensions that weren't there before. So these indicator-based processes also offer insight into alternative policy instruments. They involve different actors groups with the different consultation processes. Apart from national administrations, ministries, they open up the commission work, also for stakeholder groups, for citizens. And what we have in recent 2-3 years, a stronger focus on citizen-centered perspective, also on statistics, which is an issue with the creation of statistics, of survey data, which is very rare. And we do have 2 to 3 big players in the field who generate this data on a global level. But nevertheless, citizens' perspective come more in with all the wave of well-being reports that we have. So it matters to us now, not only if the state performs well, but if the citizens of the states are doing better than before because of the policies. So we have an element of innovation in there. And the evidence-based processes offer us a multiple use. So you can use them, you can use these processes and the arguments deriving from them, instrumental, conceptual, political, so they are of use for different actors groups as well. This is on the potential of the instrument side. So what are the problems, what we need to be aware of when we talk of these processes, and we will learn much more about that in the next 2 panels. They are normative in character. So we have decisions, even if we define and discuss the underlying concepts, these are normative decisions. There's a difference if I say I limit myself to the budget balance over time, or if I have intergenerational, intragenerational aspects there. We do have normative decisions with the underlying concepts that we take, and these have implications. It's not that we should shy away from these decisions, but the awareness should be there, that indicators are per se not neutral. They are normative decisions. We do have an issue with the rhetoric and the reality. If you go into the sustainable development debate, there is a lot of rhetoric, while what we measure in reality still is a bit behind the expectations and the reporting rhetoric that we have. We should be aware of that. It's not literally translation, the reports into policies. So there's the proxy and reality gap that we have there. Means and ends dilemma, the definition of whether, for example, within the fiscal sustainability dialogue and area, is fiscal sustainability a means or an end of the policies that we create? These are important normative decisions. So is it a means for sustainable development, or is it an end in itself for fiscal policy of the states? These are decisions that we need to take and that we should be aware of when we create the policies. The problems with expert language, what we have faced, particularly now with the Brexit discussion, the end of the will to listen to experts, everything that is around this element of the dialogue, has to do with the difficulty of common understanding of concepts. So what do we understand under the framework of sustainable development? What do we understand under the framework of good climate change policies? There's an element of oversimplification because we need to measure. We need to have proxies to measure the concepts. So we always need to be aware of that what we measure is not really what we mean and what we intend to influence as policymakers. Life cycles, paradigms have life cycles. They come up and they then fade away again, but policies that had been made 5 years ago still have this inherent paradigm as an intrinsic core. So evidence from a certain point can even be contested as not any longer up to date or even on vogue, if on voguishness is a concept that you should have in policy making. But this is something that we need to be aware of. Tendency of epistemic community building. So is it really closed expert cycles that do certain policies and that create evidence? Is it islands of knowledge that we create, or is it knowledge, such as Christine mentioned and underlined, that we want to bring into the citizenry, that we bring to citizens, that we empower citizens with, to use and to contrast policy making? And what stands on the potential side stands as well on the problematic side, the multiple use. So everyone can use it for nearly everything. And that's what just we need to be aware of when we discuss of the benefits of evidence and the quality of evidence. What sort of evidence, created by whom, used by whom, for what purposes. And that value-based decisions and use is a fundamental part of evidence-based policymaking from an analytical point of view, just to have this in mind. If I now talk about transparency and democracy, as elements that evidence-based policymaking can support, I want to do that with two examples from the non-EU area. On the one hand, because it was global governance by indicators that we analyzed, but on the other hand, also because I wanted to highlight the function and not bring in contestation about the cases. So the naming, blaming, shaming should have not been a point in that. And I want to talk about the transparency and how far evidence-based policy making can enhance transparency of policy instruments on the Nigerian case, with the Nigerian oil price-based fiscal rule that was inaugurated 2004 and became a law, so entered the legal acquis of the country in 2007. Because within the development and within the structure of this particular policy tool, we see how evidence informed and made the process more transparent, the policy process. So what was the issue? Like all other commodity export dependent countries, in Nigeria we have a volatile revenues share that makes the budget procedure quite difficult to be structured, because oil revenue is a part that is huge in the budget, but that is volatile. So there was the need for a debt and for stabilizing the budget, the revenue side of the budget. And the discussion in Nigeria very much informed the overall discussion of a fiscal sustainability rule in Africa. So there was a conceptual debate about whether this, for commodity dependent countries, commodity export dependent countries, would have been something to serve as a role model. So informed by the global debate about fiscal sustainability, there was a in-depth analysis of the revenue and budget situation in Nigeria, and experts came up with the overall result that the primary balance and the debt sustainability analysis were not sufficient in the Nigerian case. So that they had to have stabilizers inbuilt in the system to be responsive to issues of the budget in times of low exports of crude oil or high exports, to have a limit on that. Decision was taken to integrate a oil price reference oil price in the budget, and to base the calculation of the budget on this reference oil price, which reflected and imitated a 10-year average oil price, combined with an average of the overall exports, of the overall exports. So these were conservative, so below the international price, and offered an inflow into the crude oil excess fund, the National Wealth Fund. Whenever the purchases were higher, the fund was filled up, and whenever the exports were lower, the budget was supported by that. At the same time, there was a budget ceiling introduced by this reference crude oil price, that were within the framework of a rolling 3 years rolling budget, meant to be the ceiling of the ministry's portfolios as well. So there was the combination of a traditional conservative estimation and the stabilization of the budget in terms in times of the volatile aspect. What this revealed, so the stabilization of the budget, revealed a problem and a potential. So the problem that was becoming clear is that the political process nevertheless depends on negotiations between the president, the parliament, and the prime minister in terms of establishing the reference oil price in terms of numbers of US dollar per barrel. This is still a negotiation process. So it's not calculated per se. The price proposal is brought before the parliament and then negotiation enters, which leads to a delay in the budget sometimes. The missing consideration of correlations between macroeconomic conditions and the oil price is an issue, and the collinearity, so the interrelation between oil price and other sectors that are influenced. But through the screening of the policy process, these issues were highlighted, and since late 2014 until now, they are in the process of review. So, as a potential side, different stakeholders were integrated, and this policy was opened up because revenue from the commodity exports in some African countries, so the high dependence on the revenues detaches the parliament and the government sometimes from the electorate, because of course they don't rely heavily on tax incomes, so the policies are could potentially be more distant from the electorate than other countries. So it opened up the political process. Transparency was brought in, and it was a moment in which the government and the parliament scrutinized the overall process of establishing the budget. So in this case, we saw that transparency was increased through evidence-based policy making. On the democratic side, what we in Europe discuss in a bit different terms than maybe developing countries, because it seems that the public debate in Europe contests evidence-based processes more than in other regions of the world, is something that we found differently, for example, in India, where evidence-based processes and the creation of evidence, yet a different quality of evidence, that we will see later on, but the creation of evidence through citizens has become an incredible moment and instrument of empowerment of civil society. So what was the basis in India? In India, we did have a missing debate on the perception of corruption. There was an agreement about the issue, so the problem was acknowledged and it was perceived as an overall malaise of the political system. But it was neither measured nor was there a debate about the levels and the quality of corruption at national, state level and state level. Institutionalization of policies against corruption, anti-corruption policies were different at national level and at state level. So we had ombudsman systems in place at the state level. So the policies at national level are created, are yet not implemented for a national equivalent, a national ombudsman on corruption. But nevertheless, we have a legal framework on rights-based approaches to access to service, for example, in place. What this now presented the citizens with is an issue of how to control the implementation of these policies on the ground. And how to measure whether or not public officials indeed obey to these quality of service laws that were established. What now came in this particular case was a mixture of the global debate that we had on corruption, very much driven by Transparency International, by the Corruption Perception Index, the Bribe Payers Index, the big evidence-based processes that we had at global level, and activities of several non-governmental organizations and civil society organizations on the ground that were interested in establishing own frameworks for measuring corruption on the ground, informed by these global paradigms that we had. And what I took out, there are several ones, but what I took out, because it's interesting and it presents a different sort of evidence that we're talking about, is the I Paid a Bribe website by a regional NGO, which is the Jakarta Center for Citizen and Democracy. So what did they do? In the beginning, it is an initiative in Bangalore. In the beginning, it was a website, grassroots movement, where in order to attract the attention of citizens, the founders of that website said, we want to establish a market price on corruption. Let's see what it costs. And by that, they attracted the interest of citizens to report. So it was an open, crowdsourced reporting platform where people could report their experience with incidences of bribe paying. It was a moderated one, so people could report and can still report anonymously. And the platform moderators are controlling so you can report the place, the department, the topic, and the sum of your bribe experience, and they are controlling, is this department in place, is this procedure that the person says usually performed at that place. So there's anecdotal evidence which is yet moderated and a bit controlled. So we're talking about a different form of evidence that I also want to inject into the discussion. Is hard data, statistics, the only evidence that we are talking about? Or if we talk about evidence-based policy making, we also have to factor in different forms of evidence, like anecdotal evidence, particularly if we deal with members of parliament who have to reconnect in two directions, with the electorate and with the political system. So do we have to be more open to different sorts of evidence in order to inform policy making? And this example is a good example in which the citizens indeed impacted on the measurement and on the implementation of anti-corruption policies in the end, because they provided, although anecdotal, but they provided the evidence and they created political pressure on the authorities to establish implementation monitoring mechanisms. So here we have evidence, the creation of evidence as an empowerment tool for citizens to be part and to provide part of the evidence that impact on governance structures. So although I know that within the European context we are always, not always, but we are predominantly contesting evidence and experts and the camps they are in, the interest they are pursuing, in other parts of the world, evidence is something with which that empowers citizens, the creation of evidence. So for our workshop, and that's where I want to stop, for our workshop, I think we should reflect stronger, and also for our work, and for the reflection on what is evidenced in policy making, what actors create evidence. I think it's worth focusing on some issues. So in how far are these evidence creation and production processes open to public scrutiny? So can they be understood by citizens? Are they contested? Are they contestable even? Is there a certain hierarchy of power structures that informs policy making at different levels of the European Union? Is there a relationship between participatory structures in political systems and evidence creation, as we saw in other parts of the world within the EU, or are we a bit more detached because we have different outlets of influencing or accessing the political process? what sort of institutional capacity do we need to select, evaluate, and process evidence? How do we inform policymakers that there is a certain need to pre-process data before we can feed it into policymaking? That I need to be sure who produces the data, for what reason, influenced by what funders maybe. So the awareness of the differences in the instruments is important. The requirements for neutrality and access to evidence. So as a policymaker, whenever I have a hearing, do I have to make sure that all camps are heard? Do I have to open up? Can I ex ante be political in the selection of my experts? Shouldn't I? The requirements, the institutional on neutrality and access. And finally, also the instrumental limits. So what sort of evidence? It's different, as Christine said, if I work with input and output indicators, there's a difference to outcome and impact indicators. Ecology of indicators. There is such a mushrooming of evidence and production of evidence that I need to have a certain overview on what is there to decide what to take. And this is a very delicate element that I need to have structured as a policymaker. One size fits all versus national adaptation. What we saw with Nigeria, national adaptation is extremely important to make full use of the potential. In Europe, we tend to have many one-size-fits-all processes. We do have fixed rules established to which countries need to obey to. Increasingly, in recent times, we leave the way how to reach reduction, climate change, CO2 reduction targets, for example, we leave more open to the countries, but the instrumental limits are there. Post-factual trends and politicization, which is a huge issue current times. And I'm happy to hear more in the different panels on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabi. This was a great presentation, and I think it's very valuable to leave our usual Eurocentric perspective from time to time. So this was really very interesting. Let me say already now that we have speakers' lunch in the Sala Bandieri just next door. And for the other participants of the roundtable, I can warmly recommend our excellent canteen, which is just one floor downstairs from here. Now, let us open the floor. I have already a first request to take the floor from our Vice President Paschko.
Thank you very much. I agree that today, our challenge is to really get out of a mass of data what is really relevant and what is not. Relevant to what we need to work with data, for what we want to employ those data. Before it was very difficult because you had very few information and you had to make the best of it and to put the 3-4 pieces of information into the right design so you would get an idea of what you're talking about. Today you have a mass of information and you have to, select the right information. Well, that's one thing. The second thing is about corruption. I'm coming from a country where I breathe anti-corruption. Every weekend I go home. Everybody is fighting corruption. We have historic characters, comparable characters who deal with anti-corruption. But I would say, that sometimes, and I wonder if we are really paying attention to this. Sometimes, having anti-corruption institutions is exactly the way to protect corruption. I'm saying, because you say, you criticize us because we don't have that. No, we do have an institution. And therefore, you see, the institution is there, we are fighting corruption. The problem is, that we have to measure also the effectiveness of those institutions, not only their existence, and to be satisfied with that. A second thing is, for instance, bureaucracy is generating corruption. Because bureaucracy is made complicated, so, you know, the citizen who has to fulfill all the bureaucracy would have to cut through, and therefore, you know, he has to pay through. And this is a form of corruption. But it's not enough to scare people not to practice corruption. Because usually what we are doing, we are at this level. We try to scare them through the measures which we take. I encourage you to come and report to me that this guy is corrupt. I'm arresting him. I'm making a big case on television. And then I hope, you know, that others would be discouraged to do that. And therefore, you know, this is the way corruption is being diminished. Is it enough? I'm asking. The problem is, you know, that corruption in some societies is part of the culture. It's part of the culture of that society. So, therefore, you know, if we really want to deal with anti-corruption, we should encourage the creation of a culture of anti-corruption. And that should go down there in education, kids, and so on and so forth. But we do not, certainly this is too big a task to really involve ourselves into it. But essentially, we should pay attention to these sort of things too. Not only, you know, to these surface things which we can really move. You mentioned, sir, about the social equality, social. And my impression was, you know, that me as a citizen, not as a member of parliament, I am for you a sort of a fish in a tank. You say, Romania and Lithuania, the other guys are very good. That's all, you know. So I agree that somehow, you know, so your view is correct. I'm not challenging it. But what shall we do with that view? Is it, you know, somebody in Brussels criticizing my government in Romania because the government is not providing those steps? No, because, you know, if we do that, then we give ammunition to the opposition, and we don't want to do that. So it's perfect. We are witnessing this, you know, but at the same time, you know, let things go their own way. So this is where I am. I want to see something changed afterwards. Our work should somehow reflect into a change. What is our contribution? Otherwise, we make photos of various situations, and we have a nice exhibition of photography, and that's it. Otherwise. So maybe I'm asking too much. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President Pașcu. Are there other comments? Yes, Jean-Claude, please.
Yes, I had two questions reacting to Gabi Umbach's last slide and conclusion, but maybe just before, I was not aware that scientists, hard scientists and social scientists alike would have to actually propose the measures based on the indicators that they derive. So this is an interesting debate because it means that the politicians and the political world and policy-making institutions are waiting not only for data and indicators, but also for recommendations on how to change the system. My view was that this would be the job of policymakers and politicians, not scientists. So that's the first remark. Then coming back to what Gabi said, I have two questions. One is this difference that you highlighted in a very apt way between the perception of expert advice in Europe and in the rest of the world. Why do you think this is the case? What is the explanation? Is it perhaps, I mean, just a controversial thought? Is it a result of abundance of data and indicators that makes us more prone to criticism? Or is this just a difference in the way citizens are in Europe and in the rest of the world? And finally, you addressed neutrality in one of your slides. Could you say a bit more about that? Is it independence of experts? Is this non-bias? Is it non-conflict of interest? I mean, what do you mean exactly by neutrality? Thank you.
Would you like to answer directly?
We can collect.
the question that Vice President Pascu asked, but in a particular context. The Daniel Schröd-Tischler, your excellent assessment of the situation on social justice in the index, how far do you then try to draw out from that the question of which policies work in which particular national settings? Because it seems to me that the bridge between the two elements here is this issue of which policy solutions work. To have this wonderful X-ray, if you like, of the situation across the European Union in this particular field is great. But policymakers, if you just hand that to policymakers and say, okay, guys, it's over to you now to make the political choices about what to do, that's not actually hugely helpful. What is very helpful is to be able to say that based on the comparative analysis that's been done, there seems to be a recurrent pattern that certain policies work better than others, maybe in certain settings, and our advice to you in this context would therefore to explore in your political choices this route rather than another. And so I wondered how far you'd taken the analysis to that next step.
Yeah, maybe just to follow up briefly on this as well, and thanks all for your contributions, very inspiring. I see a common trend here between what Gabi said, and I guess we will develop this further in the next session. You've just pointing at all the problems that we are facing as practitioners, but also what Christina said. I mean, you said something, quite clearly a few times, that we have to engage with the user, which comes to the fact of what policies do we want to make out of all this data. Now, Gabi, you've pointed out the users are of different kind. It's a bit difficult sometimes to identify the user, identify the process of between the material and the user. However, this is actually a key pattern, and we've also seen that this is mutually feeding. The user creating the data influencing the user. I found that kind of dynamic quite interesting. I wonder if you could elaborate on that aspect as well.
Yeah, I was worried about how to say this. This sounds quite challenging, but I'm not worried anymore. The tone was set at the start. I wonder, it was important to experience these presentations, I think, because they give you a strong sense of how difficult it is for a policymaker to process information quickly. So, I try not to sound insulting, but there were 4 large presentations, lots of detail, some of it really hard to follow. And I think, if you asked most of the audience to write down a few points, what do you remember, key points you remember, I think they would struggle. So I think that's good context, isn't it, for saying to people providing this information, what shall I do with this if ordinarily I won't even remember any of it? So then really you come into, well, you have to simplify this for any audience, and then it comes down to a very small number of key points that you have to remember. And so then I wonder if that then feeds into your point about the division between providing information and asking people to do with it. There's that great phrase, honest broker, which is that scientists are just there to give evidence and, that then we stop. Yeah. But then I think these presentations show you can't do that, because if you just stop, no one will do anything, and it will be quite reasonable. So what happens when you go beyond that? You say, here are the implications of what we do. And what can you do? I guess the question is, what can you do to get people to trust your data enough for them to act on your recommendations without actually knowing how you came about them?
Maybe at this moment I should give a chance to Daniel and Gabi to respond to what has been said so far. I see that you would like, Katia, you would like to take the floor afterwards? Okay, but maybe we get the 2 replies from Gabi and Daniel.
Good, golden rule. So, I think, Jean-Claude, you pointed at the most difficult question. Why? Why perception, why expertise is largely perceived negative. This, to my understanding, within the European context, has clearly to do with the politicization of evidence after the crisis and the crisis reaction. And that the evidence produced led to policies that were not largely favorable for huge groups of European citizens. So this is an emotional part where we enter the populist debate, the value debate, but what is more, we depart from values to emotions in politics. And this makes it currently difficult to recalibrate evidence-based policy making to the position where it should be to inform neutrally the process, because evidence seems to be contested the moment it is expressed. And which is not, by the way, a European phenomenon, which we see with the presidential campaign in the US. So there seems to be, through the politicization of the use of evidence in the political process over the past 7 years, an issue where emotions come in policy making, and where it's an interesting political task to bring this back to what it should be, to contrast different views and different sorts of evidence to find the best policy then on this ground. Neutrality, what I mean with neutrality here, is an institutional requirement for, and in our particular case here, this would be largely the administrations of the Parliament, for example, but also of the Commission, to be aware of where evidence is produced, who produces that evidence, for what purpose, is there an inbuilt interest, is there a normative assumption behind that? And whenever I compose a group of experts for a hearing, I need to be aware that I need to combine these neutrally, so that I need to give pro-con or different political camps the room to discuss, to inform policymakers on a neutral and balanced base. The user focus quickly, and the interrelation between users and producers, depending a bit when the ping-pong process starts. Whenever you have grassroots anecdotal evidence, as a producer, you then can step in and, by creating methodologically sound processes to further develop the data, take it from there. And you have a group that is already aware of that it is powerful to create evidence. And this is a link. This is the one side of it, the production side. The other side is the use of data to contest. We do have this increasingly with all the fact-checking platforms that are out there, but it should become, and hopefully also the data literacy campaign that Eurostat is starting, it should become a natural reflex to check statistics, to check data, to try and get evidence on what political actors say and what they base their policies on for the citizens. So in thus far the engagement of the user. And just quickly to the part of culture and corruption, Vice President Paşcu, which is indeed a point that was taken up in the global debate on creating corruption indicators, the need to contextualize with the political culture, especially if you have Southern Hemisphere countries that are analyzed, certain forms of clientelism form part of the administration. And we saw that within these processes, instruments that are developed one-to-one for northern public administrations can't be used on the ground and need to be contextualized. So this is taken, indeed, if you go into the analysis and the indicators of corruption, this is taken into account on the ground, and there's a bit of a differentiation going on. So you're right with that. Yeah.
Paradoxically, a long stream of success in anti-corruption means that the corruption still exists. And actually your fight is not effective. Tell me that I'm wrong in this logic. Am I? I don't think. So, see?
I have 2 more requests for the floor, but I would like to say that lunch is waiting for us, so maybe we could all be succinct. First of all, I have to give Daniel a chance to reply.
Just very quickly, I completely agree with you. That is crucial to go certainly a step further than we do with this study. So this is just a rough picture of the state of social justice, and you can always question the selection of criteria and indicators. But as a first step, I think it's a useful contribution to shape, in a way, the public discourse across Europe. And normally we are quite successful in disseminating the findings and doing quite successful press work, and we always have a good media coverage and so on. So this helps to raise awareness for this topic, and I think this is a first step. But you are completely right. One must go a step further, and I think that's also something that we do in other projects we are conducting at the Bertelsmann Foundation. So I think or the study I do with the Social Justice Index goes hand in hand with other projects which are more specific in terms of which policy solutions work in different policy areas. So we have projects on labor market conditions in the European Union. We have projects on education, macroeconomic projects and so on, and one has to link the overall picture with the more concrete work on the ground on these policy areas, and that's what we are doing, I think. So for instance, we have one project that tries to assess whether it's possible to transfer certain ideas of the German dual vocational education system to countries such as Spain, for instance. So just to look whether a specific policy solution that works in Germany might be transferable to other countries. But this is quite complicated because you have lots of path dependencies, institutional setups that often hamper the transferability of policy ideas. But we certainly go much deeper than we do with this kind of study that I presented today.
There are actually 3 requests, so please be as short as possible. Katia.
Indeed, my side is just a very brief point. I mean, I wanted to touch upon this debate between taking pictures and taking policy action, or at least knowing what kind of policy action could be taken. I liked a lot the analogy used by Vice President Pașcu. Well, I would say as a commission official, I would say that I would see the value in both types of exercises. I mean, I definitely see the point where we need to translate this kind of evidence in kind of support for specific policy actions. And I see that the academic community can strongly contribute in this respect as well. But I also see the contribution by scientists in providing excellent pictures. You see, even if in the case they stop there, as a commission official, I must say that we always like having some kind of strongly reasoned evidence that we can use in our reasoning on how to then what kind of policy advice to provide to our political masters. And at the same time, we like also having some kind of independently produced analysis that in case we can compare to our own findings. I mean, it's always useful, I mean, to have different kind of points of view, even on the same item. So I would say, of course, I strongly see the point about translating these things in policy advice, but I also see a lot of value into this kind of excellent pictures that are provided by scientists that can be used by the Commission services. I mean, now it's a long time that I don't work for the Directorate-General for Employment and Social Affairs, but when I was there, I mean, we relied strongly also on independently produced evidence of this kind. I would expect, now I don't want to talk for colleagues, but I would expect your work to be extremely valuable for that kind of in-house work on policy advice and recommendations. Thanks.
Bridget?
Just very briefly, I think we had 2 very good examples of the different production of knowledge and the way in which they're used and related to the public policy system. Katia, the Commission, it's the fiscal sustainability exercise is part of the internal policy process within the Commission in terms of a contribution to the country-specific recommendations, but also into economic governance of the union, whereas the work on social justice is completely external. It's entirely driven by a think tank. And so I think we're dealing with qualitatively different processes with qualitatively different impacts and standing in terms of the public policy process. So I think that it's important that we recognise that the production is very different, but also the standing. And then in terms of the work on social justice, I'm very conflicted, because on the one hand, I think that it is really admirable to try to grasp what is a very complex and difficult concept and reduce it. But I really worry when I see one indicator after another that are very different and read differently in different countries and reduced to numbers and then reproduced in terms of one outcome. I have to say that I think we overdo that today, and there are much, if I wanted to know about social justice, I would look at over a 20-year period what's happening, the Gini coefficient, what's happening middle incomes, what's happening the lower, what's the what impact has the welfare system. But as you try to pile more and more in, then I begin to worry. So I think that admirable and all as it is, I think we need to be somewhat cautious about drawing major conclusions, substantive policy conclusions from something that is produced that is quite as complex as this. And sometimes it might be better to strip back a little and just see what really matters. And then the third point I would make is the time frames of all of this. There are very serious dangers in taking snapshots all the time. What we need to look at also as one does that is what's happening over a longer time period, because individuals in society feel a lot different about things depending on whether things are getting marginally better or marginally worse or much worse. So you may have your level of material deprivation may be high, but if things are getting better, your actual experience of it can be very different. So again, I think time matters, and I think we're in a world today where there's almost a lot of snapshots and not enough what I would call longue durée, 10, 15, 20, 5, 10, 15 year time spans in terms of this kind of work.
Thanks, Bridget. And the last request comes from Christine Korman, please.
Yes, I would just like to come back on this user perspective to highlight, two things. First, we have, for the quality of our statistics, this concept of fit for purpose. That the quality level should be really made for the specific purpose. So that means we need to know the purpose. And I think at least the discussion with the key users, policymakers, we have a lot of dialogue within, of course, with DGs of the Commission, annual hearings and so on, but it's very crucial for us to know really what would be the purpose and the context of the use. And so for this, we have developed some aspects, and we also provide, in some cases, methodological guidance, even to indicators that are made by Commission DGs themselves, but we can then give some support. And then last point, also in relation to more the democratic and citizen perspective, I think we have also seen over the last years a wish to have also indicators that relate more directly to people's life, and in particular, this distinction between average and distribution. And this is typically for the income, for example, where average income doesn't relate to people's lives, whereas a distribution of income will relate to people's life. And I think we are trying to get also these things on board, also to produce indicators that are not only meaningful to have one single figure, but that can be meaningful for people and relate to their lives.
Thank you very much, Christine. And thank you all for your contributions to the debate. And of course, thanks to the speakers once more for really interesting presentations. Over the past few days, I read Giles Merritt's last book, Slippery Slopes, Europe's Troubled Future. And of course, you know that he knows Brussels better than many others. And he arrives at one point at a conclusion which really kept me mulling for quite some time. And I think it's indirectly related to our discussion this morning. He says that the fact that much news coming out of Brussels, notably from the EU institutions, is framed as good news, may be responsible, at least partially responsible, for the fact that citizens, at least for the past few years, have seen the EU institutions as the main culprits for austerity policies, rising unemployment, and even unrelated problems such as illicit immigration, rather than the member state governments. So is this a plea for more objective or even negative information coming from the EU institutions? I don't know an answer to this, but I found the question raised by Giles Merritt really intriguing. Now, thank you all once more and enjoy your lunch.